I started gaming with the Atari 2600, but when the Coleco came out, I found myself rebuying games that I've already purchased for my older system. So, was it worth it? I am the Game Collector, and this is Second Opinion Games, and today I compare the Atari 2600 versus the Colecovision.
Second Opinion Games.
Let's start things off with a little bit of Beam Rider. This is one of the more expensive Atari 2600 games, and definitely one of the better ones. Now, even though the sound effects are rather crude, it really shines in the gameplay. You have to shoot down a certain amount of space aliens, judged by the number in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. When you finally do, then you'll have a showdown with the mothership, which then you have to use your long-range missiles by pressing up and the fire button to take that out. But you only have a couple of these missiles, and chances are the mothership is gonna get away before you move on to the next sector and try and clear out all the space aliens there. On the Atari 2600, it looks pretty darn good for the system, but on the ColecoVision, it is like night and day. For one, you can actually tell that there are missiles that you're firing. You actually have a sense of moving forward, unlike the Atari 2600 version, and it looks just much better. I could not believe the massive step up that the Coleco had from the Atari 2600, so it really does show that this is a far more powerful system. Maybe not as powerful as the Nintendo, but then again, this was an early console. Moving on to Burger Time, back to the Atari. Man, if you didn't play Burger Time in the arcade and you just put this one in, you had no idea what the heck was going on or what these things were that were trying to attack you. Now, what you have to do is walk across what looks like all buns, and when you do, they fall down to the bottom of the screen, and then they actually have a little bit of color. Eventually, when you get them all made, they do look like burgers, but man, graphically, this is just unplayably bad. However, the enemies themselves don't seem too aggressive, so you can start clearing levels. Over to the ColecoVision version, you'll find out that it looks a lot more like the arcade. Right down to how mean these main enemies are. They will relentlessly track you down and stomp you into the dust. Luckily, you have your pepper action button, so you could buy yourself a little bit of time. And when an enemy happens to be on a burger patty, you could drop him down an extra level, or maybe even use the burger patties to kill the enemies themselves. But you have to watch for the respawn points, because if you kill an enemy and you happen to be on that particular enemy's respawn point, well then you will die. This is a pretty difficult game, and even though it looks a lot better on the Coleco, I do find myself clearing more levels on the Atari 2600. So in the end, it's kind of up to you which you think's better, and I barely prefer the Atari 2600 version. Jumping over to Defender, the game that might have inspired the movie Independence Day. You're obviously in a city trying to save a bunch of people from being kidnapped by evil space aliens. If the space aliens get to the upper atmosphere, well then they become super aggressive after devouring their human foes, and they will relentlessly track you down. You also have some missiles here, which I never freaking figured out how to fire. I guess maybe you could toggle the switches on the Atari itself, but because this system is so finicky, I might end up shutting it off if I toggle those switches, so I just never worried about the missiles whatsoever. You do have a radar screen at the top, so you can see exactly where the enemies are and where the people are that they're trying to kidnap, so that's pretty cool. Also, if you get hit, there's a little bit of pause building up to a huge explosion, and then your ship just sort of pops. It's kinda lame. If all of the people are kidnapped, well then you just go into a hellish landscape with tons of stuff blowing up, and it gets way too confusing, and that means the game's gonna be over really quick. Over to the ColecoVision, now you're in a mountainside view. Saving people is really fun, and you can actually tell they're people this time around. Everything just plays a lot better. Because the Coleco has more than one button, you could actually use those super bombs to take out some of the more painful enemies. But what I like about this game the most is when you do get hit, the explosion is massive, and I just like how it propels outwards. It's just a lot better than even the Death Star explosion in the redone Star Wars movies. I pretty much prefer the ColecoVision ColecoVision every time on this. Then we move on to Berserk. You're a little dude fighting against robots, and all the walls are electrified. And you have to watch out because when you make it to a new level, you could be right next to the wall. So you have to give yourself a second to figure out exactly where you are. Also, depending on which level of difficulty you're on here, depends on how aggressive the little robots are. Sometimes they can shoot back at you, but most of the time they mindlessly walk into the walls themselves, which is something I always like doing, trying to figure out how to clear a level without even firing a single shot. If you stick around too long and Evil Otto shows up, it's a little smiley face that would give me nightmares all the stinking time. I seem to have a lot of nightmares from video games, probably because I played way too much. Now, the Coleco didn't get a version of Berserk, they got sort of a spiritual successor called Frenzy. You still have the Evil Otto showing up, with skeletons and other robots. The walls sometimes are electrified, and other times just make your bullets ricochet around, and some walls can even be destroyed with your laser shotgun thing, and then you could walk through them. So the maze itself is far more impressive on Frenzy and definitely feels like a more complete game. After all, Berserk on the Atari 2600 seems to go on forever, and Frenzy actually feels like it might have an end, but it really never does. You just keep on playing, and both games are a lot of fun. Moving through Hyperspace to Gorf, it starts off feeling a lot like a Space Invaders clone, but it quickly shows off that it's its own game. After playing through a couple levels, you make it to a massive flagship, which I'm not sure that you could even kill on the Atari 2600 version. I'm shooting this thing a crap ton of times, and it's just not going down. If you go to the ColecoVision, you'll find out that each of the levels are very different, and you'll find that the Atari version is just a shell of what the game actually should be. The flagship does explode in this version with an awesome explosion, and it plays a heck of a lot better on the Coleco. And you could even level up to Space Captain or Space Colonel, or I'm presuming Space General of the freaking universe, which would be completely awesome. Gorf is a heck of a good game for the Coleco, and it's a below average one for the Atari. One of my favorite games for the Atari is Jungle Hunt, a quite impressive game. It even has a little bit of parallax scrolling on the Atari 2600. You swing from vines, you go through the river with tons of crocodiles, you even run trying to dodge boulders, and then you come to cannibals, which you have to try and jump over them, and the hit detection is awful, so you just never can. If you do, you save your girlfriend. Over on the ColecoVision version, it's a heck of a lot easier, but they completely stripped away that parallax scrolling. You still swing on vines, and the second time around, you even have to worry about giant monkeys to face off against, and believe me, they are a pain. The crocodiles are huge. This time you're running up hills, and you will save your girlfriend because the hit detection isn't awful with the darn cannibals. And I'll just leave her tied up and just, you know what, this is just a great game. On either console, Jungle Hunt is awesome to play. Now, Moon Patrol is also beloved on the Atari. You have to shoot some space poop, jump over some canyons, and destroy some aliens that are trying to make your life terrible. Now you see that little teddy bear on the bottom? That means I'm playing it on easy, and it is still ridiculously difficult to beat. There's also a sort of quasi-ending to this game, as if you get to the very last section, it's over and you win. You should just make it harder then, and try to beat that. The challenge is definitely here. Now, Moon Patrol never really came out on the ColecoVision, but here's a prototype game I found, and man, is it ever good. This time you seem to be driving on the moon, you're not shooting what looks like poop, it actually looks a little bit more like rocks. When you blow up, your wheels go flying everywhere, and it shows an awesome mushroom cloud coming from your ship itself. But what I like the most, other than the fact that the backgrounds change every single time you clear a level, is the space bras that seem to be shooting at you. Yeah, tell me, does this look like a bra to you? It definitely does. Moon Patrol is great on either system, and you just cannot go wrong. Now, QBerts Cubes for the Atari 2600 game is a lesser known one, and it's also one of the most expensive games for the 2600. So if you have it, sell it because it's worth a crap ton of money, or at least it was a couple of years ago. When you start playing it, you'll find out that it's like unplayable. I'm not sure what's going on with these little squares. Just nothing feels right. Also, I have to turn the controller in my hand to even play it because I can't wrap my head around how the controls are supposed to work, and I can't clear a single level of this game. If I put in the Colecovision version, I could actually figure out how to play it. You're supposed to match the blocks with the block that's in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, and it actually becomes a very competent puzzle game. I could easily avoid the little space critters that seem to be trying to track me down, and I could even throw them off the map if I get them to jump on a block as it's turning. I could clear levels left and right, and this is really fun to play on the Colecovision. On the Atari 2600, it's just not worth it at all. Skiing's a kind of cool game for the Atari 2600. Everything's white because you're skiing, of course it should be. You could even make out some trees. You have to make it in between the flags and try and get the best time. I found myself really enjoying this game with a friend, trying to compete to see who could have the best time in making it down the hill. On the Colecovision, even though the graphics are better, it doesn't look like you're skiing. It looks like you're falling down out of the sky. Also, the flags are really easy to hit. It feels like they completely screwed up the collision detection, and I found it to be kind of an awful game. And this game came out in 1986. People have already moved on to Super Mario Brothers, so this was just horrible, even for the day. And I can't recommend it at all for the ColecoVision, and it's kind of fun for the Atari. Tapper's an interesting game for the Atari 2600. You have to throw some drinks down a long bar to service your customers. And when you service everyone, some dancing girls jump out and they celebrate. Then you move on to a bonus stage where a guy just shakes up all the Mountain Brew cans, and then everything fluttles around a little bit, and then it's almost impossible to pick the right one because of how it moved back and forth. On the ColecoVision, the graphics have been massively overhauled to fit much more like the arcade version, and it is also super fun to play. When you start clearing levels, there's no dancing girls, but the shaking up can bonus stage is actually playable because you could easily follow along which one has been shaken up and which one wasn't. Eventually, you'll even go out of this world to try to face off against space aliens that you have to serve up drinks to, and this is a heck of a fun game for either system, but the ColecoVision version is definitely better, and I love the different environments. But it's time to move on to our last high-flying experience with Zaxxon. Now, when you're playing this on the 2600, you might be confused exactly what the heck is going on here. You have to fly high and low. At least I guess that's what's going on here, because you could start to crash very early in the game if you don't have this figured out. Also, you have to be lined up perfectly with the space aliens that you're trying to shoot down, because they're space aliens. They need to be shot down at this point, and it's really hard to hit anything. Also, with its perspective, it's really hard to even play this game. Eventually, you do make it to a boss, I guess, but this is just unplayable, and it's really just awful on the 2600. On the ColecoVision, it moves to an isometric view, which makes a lot more sense. I was never a really big fan of this style gameplay in general, but at least now you could actually tell the different height levels, and it is far superior and quite impressive on this console. Shooting everything feels natural, and this is actually a rather fun game, but it does get really difficult. So the win again goes to the Coleco. So when you start comparing these older systems side by side, you'll find out that some titles tend to look and play completely better on the ColecoVision, like QBerts Cubes, for example. It's unplayable on the Atari, and it plays great on the Coleco. But other games like Jungle Hunt and Moon Patrol, some people actually prefer that on the Atari 2600. And when it comes down to games like Berserk and Frenzy, you just can't go wrong no matter what console you play. So in the end, even though I do tend to like most Coleco games more, I'm not passing up to play a little Atari any day of the week. But of course, that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it, and this is far from the only group of games that came out for both consoles. I plan on doing a couple of these, and one of the things I was most impressed about this episode was Beam Rider. It is great on the Atari 2600, but the Coleco just blew me away with this. It plays so much better. So I want to know what your favorite ColecoVision game is, and did it also come out on the Atari 2600? So I plan on doing a couple more of these, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope to hear from you down in the comment box down below. So until later, I will see you again, guys.